So I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know it's the last session of today, so I really appreciate you staying and coming to see me. I'm Emily Lehsten. I graduated from the University of Salford and earned my master's degree in the psychology of coercive control. And the research I'm presenting today is my dissertation. Um, I have a few things that I wanted to say beforehand. First, if you'll excuse me for sitting, I have a bum hip, and it hurts to stand, so I'm just gonna sit, and if my legs start shaking, please ignore it. Also, I wanted to give a trigger warning. There is explicit material in my presentation, and it's really important to take care of yourselves. So if you feel uncomfortable or you need to leave for any reason, please feel free to do so. It won't hurt my feelings. I understand. So I'd like to get started. Uh, my research is a case study investigating the lived experience of men who were abused in coercively cultic environments. The research into the victimization of women regarding coercive control in intimate partner violence and coercively controlling cultic environments has been at the forefront of victim survivor research, and rightly so. However, if you conduct a Google or library search, you will find very few sources regarding violence against men. This one-sided research, while not diminishing the victimization of women, disadvantages male victims of violence and tends to push said violence and said research aside or outright ignore it. My research aimed to illustrate the experiences of male victims in coercively controlling cultic environments and determine themes across their experiences. The research included an examination of IPV as well as anecdotal evidence, given the limited research in the context of cultic environments. The research also included an examination of cultic language and its damaging effects. The hope is to encourage more research and lead to more meaningful services for men who have been victimized. Male victims of coercive control are largely ignored or ridiculed by society, leading to reduced reporting and a lack of literature regarding their abuse. Literature regarding male coercive control and sexual abuse is lacking for several reasons, two of which include stereotypes and hegemonic masculinity. Several stereotypes contribute to the lack of literature, including that women cannot assault men as men are stronger than women and should be able to stop the abuse. Women are not violent or aggressive, and men are insatiable when it comes to sex and therefore cannot be sexually victimized. Stemple and Meyer 2014 further argued that the idea of women perpetrating sexual violence against men is politically unpalatable, or due to conformity bias, wherein data conflicts with established beliefs are ignored. The second reason for the lack of literature is hegemonic masculinity. Gender expectations for men include a lack of emotion, self-reliance, invulnerability, and aggression. These traits are explicitly taught to men, and when men are prohibited from expressing these traits, they can lose their sense of self and doubt their masculinity, creating an identity crisis. These cultural beliefs and the pressure to conform to the archetypal male have led to biased responses toward male victims and lower reporting numbers for sexual abuse and coercive control. Gervais 2018 provides examples of police responses, including suspicion, ridicule, and outright disbelief on the part of the police, which leads to some men doubting themselves and questioning their masculinity. Many men regret their decision to disclose their abuse and have stated that reporting the experiences was worse than the experience itself. When sharing their experience with others, victims are often blamed for their own abuse. Walker et al. 2020 reported that over 90% of male participants in their research discussed their experiences, quote, with a friend or family member, and those who did so were met with very mixed responses, unquote. One participant stated that he was, quote, bashed over the head with an iron by a partner. My male friends laughed at me, and the few women I told asked what I did to provoke such an action, unquote. Another man claimed that he was told women have suffered abuse and violation a lot worse than you or any other man. Some men are accused of being homosexual, as one myth of male rape is that it is only a homosexual act. And finally, some men do not see themselves as victims of abuse, expressing anger over fear and vulnerability. Statistics on this slide show the prevalence of male victims of sexual assault between 2022 and 2023. These statistics indicate that sexual assault against men has risen by nearly 1% from 2022 to 2023, showing a continuing need for research. Elements of Stephen Hassan's bite model appear in both IPV and cultic environments. The bite model encapsulates four factors that perpetrators use to create destructive environments: behavior, information, thought, and emotion control. Hassan explains, quote, serve as the foundation for understanding destructive influence. These four components promote dependency and obedience, unquote. Male victims of IPV have reported such controlling abuses as humiliation and degradation, intimidation, controlled access to education, employment, and physical abuse. Behavior control in cult shows the same abuses of men as abusive relationships. During his time as leader of Nexium, Keith Raniere crossed the boundaries of his male followers through a program called the Society of Protectors, or SOP. This program was designed specifically for men and promoted hegemonic masculinity while punishing them in a humiliating fashion for violating masculine norms. Raniere preached the virtues of power and aggression. He taught that men were born able to consider their actions and use restraint, making them naturally honorable and ethical. Raniere demanded that SOP members answer calls from their leader at any moment, controlling victims' time and behavior. Members provided collateral to prove their loyalty to the program, including large sums of money and humiliating details that could ultimately lead to the loss of loved ones if ever released. Collateral not only proved men's loyalty to Raniere, but it was also understood that failure to comply with SOP practices would result in public humiliation using said collateral. Gaslighting is a tactic that perpetrators use to create a reality in which victims feel that their own realities are upside down or feel they are going crazy until they believe that the perpetrator's reality is their own. Rituals can play a crucial role in destructive cultic communities. Scott Williams, the leader of Christian Assemblies International, CAI, used bonding rituals to groom male members of the church for sex. Williams designed a ritual to pair men together as spiritual couples. He asserted that the spiritual male coupling was the most essential relationship under God and the most important commitment in the church. Men slept naked together and were encouraged to become intimate. All of this was done regardless of marital status or sexual orientation. This ritual, Williams relied on a combination of gaslighting and spiritual, emotional, and physical abuse. He convinced his followers that he would play the role of judge on Judgment Day and that his word superseded that of established Christian doctrine. Doing so kept members from reporting the abuse they endured while in Williams' homosexual ring, wherein they were subject to non-consensual massages, after which Williams would choose a member to have sex with. Williams' male victims were predominantly heterosexual men who later asserted that they went along with the activity despite being embarrassed and ashamed, which also prevented them from bringing the allegations of the abuse to local authorities. Many spiritual cult leaders use the themes of transcendence to justify their abuse. Using coercive rituals, Williams created environments in which men were forced to consent to sexual assault with their perpetrators or each other at the behest of the leader, perpetrating feelings of guilt and questions about their masculinity. Jim Jones, leader of the People's Temple, claimed he had sex with male members to help them overcome latent homosexual urges. Jones used sex as a ritual administration for his flock. Lalich 1997 informs us that, quote, once sexual control is in place, no part of life is left untouched by the cult leader's influence. The satisfaction of the leader's desire becomes, therefore, an expression of the cult member's faith. This belief leads victims to consent to sexual encounters, even if they do not want to engage in those encounters. One way leaders justify their actions is by their call for divine sacrifice. This sacrifice can be in the form of service, giving up loved ones, giving up monetary responsibility, and sexual abuse. Lalich 1997 noted that, quote, the underlying rationale for sexual abuse is that nothing is too sacred to withhold from the leader, and that giving oneself, and sometimes even one's children, is viewed as a noble sacrifice. The activities within the Children of God cult provide a typical example of how information control operates. Ray in 2006 stated that, quote, the forsake all policy that stipulates that disciples must relinquish contact with friends and family and forsake worldly possessions and service, unquote. This creates an insular culture that does not allow for outside information and ultimately creates an echo chamber. This is also the case with the exclusive brethren. Outsiders are considered worldly or of the devil. Therefore, all information should come from within the group. Jaime Gomez, leader of the Buddha field, used information control to block negative criticism and promote positive feedback to the group. He prohibited reading or television within the community as he needed to control access to outside information. Due to his paranoia, Gomez also needed to control information within the cult. He used people to spy on other members and even went so far as to have members dig through others' trash if he felt they were a danger to him. As leaders of coercively controlling environments shape their followers' sense of self and beliefs, these followers begin to lose their autonomy. The researchers Lawlich and McLaren state, quote, one of the strange side effects of this process is that converts may begin to believe that they have free will and that they have intentionally chosen to de-self and obey, unquote. One ex-member of the Exclusive Brethren speaks of believing that only the group had the truth. Everyone outside the group was considered worldly and not worthy of their attention. This destruction of personal autonomy is equally evident in IPV, where men reported feelings of self-loathing and depression. One participant in Walker's et al. Study stated, quote, my ex-wife used to run me down and belittle me to the point I would hate myself, unquote. Gomez used many phrases in the Buddha field to keep members insulated and focused on his message. He used the words to manipulate his members to keep them engaged in the daily activities of the cult and further take care of Gomez's needs and desires while losing the ability to think for themselves. Phrases such as surrender, go into surrender mode, and connect to my love were used to create compliant followers and were used in the grooming of male members for sex with Gomez. Gomez pushed for surrendering such things as outside obligations, family and friends, to remove the distraction that kept members from being entirely devoted to him. Co-leaders use emotion control to keep their members off balance and dependent on the leader. They use love bombing and fear to both manipulate and control members. These emotional highs and lows keep members off balance. Quote, anger, homesickness, and jealousy are labeled selfish. Members are expected to always think of the group and never to feel for themselves, unquote, Hassan 2022. The leaders of both the Buddha Field and Word of Faith Fellowship used fear to hold on to members and threats of disaster or death as warnings for those thinking of leaving the community. Emotion control also plays a role in IPV. In Pony and Graham Kevin's 2022 work, they discovered that men feel the same emotional fear that can be seen in cults. One participant commented that, quote, I was not physically frightened, but emotionally frightened of her volatility, shouting and cruel verbal jibes that would sometimes come out of the blue. I was classically conditioned to keep her happy. Otherwise, there would be friction, aggression, or hurtful comments, unquote. Comparatively, emotion control also depends upon a leader's ability to manipulate members into believing that they are at fault when they feel inadequate or have not achieved the promised enlightenment. Emotional instability relies on anticipating rewards for good behavior. Many issues arise from experiencing coercive control, including PTSD, CPTSD, depression, suicidal ideations or attempts, and gastrointestinal problems. When people feel threatened or endure abuse, they are filled with adrenaline from the fear of not knowing what will happen when dealing with emotional highs and lows. The members of cults cannot release that energy. It gets stored in the body, which can cause the problems stated above. In coercively controlling environments, leaders use tactics that lead members to experience adrenaline rushes from experiences of euphoria or terror. Available research largely addresses female victimization, while there is a lack of research on the men in the same situations. In my study, my aims and objectives including determining the coercive tactics used against men in destructive cults, to examine the language used to manipulate followers, to illustrate the abuses men face in cultic environments, and discuss the aftermath of the abuse. I used a qualitative study with an inductive thematic analysis to examine the lived experiences of 6 men who were victimized in coercively controlling cultic environments. Participants included 6 men over the age of 18 who had been coercively controlled in a cultic environment and had been out of the cult for at least 6 months. This study represents the cult's Word of Faith Fellowship, the Exclusive Brethren, the Children of God, the Boston Movement, and the Buddha Field. During the research process and throughout the participants' stories, 4 themes presented themselves. Language is key, the many phases of abuse, achievement as a means of control, and the aftermath. The language used by destructive cults can destroy the self-esteem of members and create a sense of shame among members if they do not adhere to behavioral dictates. Participants in this study were all victims of this thought-stopping language. Participant 6, or P6, spoke about dropping critical thinking. Drop your mind, get with the program, and this is just your mind talking. These were among the thought-stopping lingo of the group. The meaning was for people to drop your critical thinking, as being in your mind was an insult that implied, quote, you are just one big fat ugly ego, unquote. Similarly, P2's group regularly said that individuals deviating from accepted thoughts would be told they were struggling. Struggling included anything from being upset, having lustful thoughts, feeling anger, or other sins. These sins evoked feelings of shame and unworthiness if the member could not meet the leader's impossible standards. P2 explained, quote, if you are upset or lusting or angry or having a fit of rage or any kind of what they would call a sin, they would say you are struggling. In each instance, blame was placed on the men if they sinned, triggering a sense of shame or unworthiness. Every participant had an example of thought-stopping language that was commonly used within their groups. Language can be used to elicit positive responses, to reward, or to encourage. For example, P2 stated the quote, I was really fired up at first. That's what they said. Excited, basically, their term is fired up, unquote. Not only was the phrase fired up used to control behavior by eliciting feelings of enthusiasm about bringing in new members, but it was also used as general jargon that became unconsciously ingrained in P2's character. P2 still unconsciously uses the term fired up when he speaks, which might indicate a lasting impression of cultic language on ex-members. It is evident from participant stories that cultic language becomes ingrained and is difficult to leave behind. While cultic leaders create language to inspire awe and enthusiasm, some language can elicit feelings of terror. The feelings usually occur when there is a threat to the member, the worst threat being shunning. In P2's cult, contributing to every Bible reading session was a mandatory activity. P2 felt that if he did not comply, he would be shunned, and P4 stated, quote, I was supposed to stand up, can't say no, and if I did, I'd lose my family, unquote. Every group had some version of shunning. Every group also had language to uplift the leader to sacred status. P6 described his leader as God's channel. Quote, I'm your God vehicle. I'm going to be that person that's going to help you. So all of your love should come here and it'll awaken your own love, unquote. Here we go. The many phases of abuse. Abuse that hides behind the guise of spiritual enlightenment or salvation is considered spiritual abuse. It can include such tactics as coercion, intimidation, threats, and emotional and psychological abuse. Anderson, 2023, states that because spiritual or religious groups are considered pro-social and used to help others, they are rarely scrutinized. This leaves the members of such groups vulnerable to grooming and further abuses. Stories of such abuse may be ignored, or the victim may be given excuses to justify the abuse. Anderson states, quote, because humans are sinners, they're going to get it wrong and sometimes even hurt others. And such leaders or institutions should not be confused with a perfect, sinless God, unquote. The spiritual power control wheel identifies 8 characteristics of spiritual abuse, giving context to the above tactics. Each of the men was subjected to most of these tactics. The only characteristic not seen in this study was the use of children, as no participant reported having children. Perpetrators of spiritual abuse use scripture, traditions, or cultural norms to manipulate and justify the abusive followers. Leaders who commit spiritual abuse use threats to control members' behavior. P2 spoke of going to hell if he ever left, and P1 was threatened similarly. By asserting authority through these threats, members felt they could not leave their cultic environment. Furthermore, question brought victim blaming and the possibility of isolation. Leaders also use community coercion. P6 stated, through the leader's manipulation, members begin to police each other, and distrust can be built among members as there is always the possibility that others might inform the leader of any offenses. One finding was an explanation for staying in a coercively controlling cult that believes in the end times. The leader of P5's cult was an end times prophet. Part of the prophecies included the destruction of the United States. Being shunned to the U.S. was terrifying to cult members who believed it a death sentence. However, at the same time, cult members wanted the destruction to happen. P5 explained why. Quote, they want destruction, they want World War III, they want the Antichrist, they want mayhem and destruction and death because it proves their beliefs are true. Unquote. Losing that belief is an existential crisis that a member's whole identity revolves around, the sacred science of which Lehsten 1961 speaks. He argues that the science, or the word of the leaders, has a strong hold over members which overrides mental processes, allowing for the attraction of extreme ideas, leading in the case of P5 to believe in the apocalypse. P5 hoped for World War III because of the threatened punishment of exile back to the doomed country, as well as the fear that if the destruction did not occur, their choices to stay and endure the abuse were for nothing. Controlling access to healthcare can be dangerous. P5 discussed 2 incidents in which he was in a life and death situation. He struggled with going to the hospital because of the cult's belief against modern medicine and their belief in faith healing. The first time his appendix burst, and the second time he cut an artery in his leg. In both cases, someone else had to convince him to go. He was terrified of the repercussions. By going to the hospital, P5 was blamed for endangering God's work and was sent away for not following doctrine. Perpetrators of spiritual abuse also use scripture to force sex, deny or force family planning, and justify genital mutilation. I'll be discussing this further in the presentation when we get to sexual abuse. Totalitarian language is woven throughout the spiritual power control model and was used by leaders to control thoughts and behaviors. While the use of loaded language is discussed previously, in this context, it illustrates the dehumanization of members through the creation of a power imbalance between them and the leader. As the leader asserts his authority using scripture or prophecy, the power imbalance leads members to lose their sense of self and the ability to question their leader or dogma. P1 and P5 shared how this type of language was used in their communities and spoke of the impacts of this language. P1 stated, quote, and having a sense of self in the group was looked down on as a bad thing. That's your ego, you know, that's just your ego. You're in your mind. You know, you're a soul. You're not a person. You need to dissolve into God, and any sense of self or boundaries around the self is anti-God. You know, that was basically how we looked at it, unquote. P5 pointed out this loss of self when he spoke of the sacred text handed down from his leader. Quote, that was the very first letter they read to me. That first night I joined, Diamonds and Dust. The whole letter was just, be this insignificant little piece of dirt. That you're just this piece of dirt, that you're nothing. It's only God. This message repeated over and over on a daily basis just becomes your mentality. You are nothing. And that, you know, that affects your whole self-esteem. I had no self-esteem. From the evidence above, it is clear that perpetrators of spiritual abuse use coercive control tactics to recruit and retain members while using their authority to prolong abusive relationships. Using the tactics outlined in the spiritual power control wheel, leaders were able to control members' behaviors, information, thoughts, and emotions, as well as employ psychological abuse. This slide gives definitions of the APA and the BPS for psychological abuse. I use both because while I am from the U.S., my dissertation was in the U.K., so I use both definitions. Analysis of the interviews illustrated the psychological abuse found in Hassan's bite model. Components of the bite model are woven into the participants' stories. Participants shared experiences regarding behavior control. P2 outlined a schedule that gave him little sleep. He described himself as being sleep deprived. Go to all the meetings, midweek Bible talks, never had time to study, never had time to sleep. My grades suffered more and more. P4 also had a tight schedule. Members were required to go to evening meetings and 5 meetings on Sunday. This schedule left P4 with no time to himself. As leaders controlled time, members of the cult had no opportunity to think about the ongoing abuse. The imposition of strict rules can be seen in P6's account of taking vows to his leader. Quote, "We had vows. The vows were important. One of the vows was, I promise, I vowed to only serve one master. Serve only one master means don't seek outside opinions, don't go to other gurus, don't listen, don't read other books. You have me as your source. Use me only." Thought control was used to stop critical thinking and instill a group think of us versus them. In P6's group, members vowed to keep holy company, meaning they should not look outside the group for social connections. P2's experience of thought control included if you're having doubts or if you weren't evangelizing enough, you weren't committed enough. Doubts were not allowed, and P2 was blamed for any lack of faith. Emotion control also plays an important role in psychological abuse. Hassan describes emotional control as the manipulation of feelings so that they remain specific and controlled. P1 discussed the feelings allowed in his cult. Emotions were bad, thoughts were bad. The only emotion you were allowed to feel is bliss and ecstasy. If members of the cult did not adhere to these feelings, they were blamed for not connecting to God in meditation. P1 stated, one side effect is that this fault is the feeling of guilt. P2 felt this at a visceral level. He felt guilty about not confessing all of his sins and went through cycles of feeling calm and anxious because he believed he would go to hell if he did not confess every sin. On the other hand, emotions can be manipulated to cause feelings of euphoria and joy. Many times this manipulation creates a placebo effect caused by the pressure of believing the leader or by group coercion. P5 explained, quote, "I felt different, but was I feeling different because they told me I was going to feel different, or was it truly spiritual? In hindsight, I can question what was going on," unquote. P6 found positive emotion from karma cleansing sessions. The leader used regression therapy to resolve emotional issues that members might have. P6 described the experience as cathartic and helpful. And while he felt this was a positive experience and not diminishing the feelings of P6, the cleansing was just one more tactic used to heighten emotion and reinforce proper feelings and behavior. The consequences of therapy at the hands of unqualified practitioners can lead to effects such as anxiety, as in P5's case. Emotions can become confused and can be used to create a sense of guilt. And as in spiritual abuse, members are blamed when they do not feel the way they are expected to feel. Psychological abuse can leave members primed for further abuses. One leader has implemented doctrine and manipulated members' emotions. He can push his followers' boundaries. Breaking down boundaries can lead to grooming and sexual abuse. These are the definitions, again, from APA and British Psychological Society of sexual abuse. 4 of the 6 men experienced sexual abuse in some manner. The sexual abuse came in many forms, and while P1 did not want to have sex with his leader, he felt obligated to do so. Quote, "And even though I didn't want to do it, there was lots of things in the group I didn't want to do. It was part of our ethic of doing things we don't want to do to go past your desires." Quote, end quote. Desires did not matter, and everything P1 did was to please the leader. P6 endured similar abuses. He viewed his sexual relationship with his leader as a spiritual awakening and part of his service. His leader told him that, quote, "All your love should come here and it'll awaken your own love," unquote. His leader slowly groomed him by flirting with him and making comments such as, quote, "Don't get distracted with all those men. Save that ass for me," unquote. He was manipulated by his leader to accept non-consensual sex as part of a ritual, a showing of love, and a way to be closer to God. His leader began with the subject of shame. He told P1 that he had nothing to be ashamed of in front of the leader. It began with gentle commands such as, quote, "Take off your pants." Then it intensified, quote, "Show me your dick," masturbate. Then it became more physical, unquote. Furthermore, the leader used victim blaming to justify the abuse. P6 stated, quote, "It was your problem and everything's in your world. So if you weren't happy, you need to get to the bottom of why. And I never felt that he was the problem," unquote. P6 also believed that the sexual abuse was part of his service to the group. By allowing the abusive relationship, he felt that the leader would be better able to assist the community. He just stated, quote, "We would massage each other for hours, but I don't know if it's consensual though. I mean, really nothing there was consensual. He would say, rub this muscle more here and rub this muscle more here. I thought I had to because he is my discipler. I don't really feel like I could say that I wanted to stop." P2 felt that these massage sessions were like a sexual release because of the sexual repression the men endured. The achievement as a means of control, enlightenment was the goal of the participants in different ways, and 5 out of the 6 men endured abuse to reach their cult's idea of enlightenment. P1 and P6 were told that they could only attain enlightenment through their leaders. This group had a ritual to bring the light of God to the members. Partaking in this ritual was an achievement and was only performed when the leader believed the members were ready. P3 found enlightenment through biblical studies and evangelizing. As part of an end times cult, P3 worried about going to hell. Seemingly because of hegemonic masculinity, these men did not or speak out as they may have seemed weak or inferior in some way. Others did not speak out because they believed that the abuses they endured was their service to the leader, regardless of how it made them feel. Manipulation tactic created an environment where the men worked hard to achieve status and enlightenment. P5 spoke of his leaders' letters to the cult, that members had to achieve certain levels of enlightenment and trust to have access to more advanced doctrine. Punishment is an essential component to the path of enlightenment. Punishment is doled out by the leaders to modify the thoughts and actions of followers. These punishments are often severe and abusive, but are necessary lessons to achieve enlightenment. 5 out of the 6 men discussed abuse as they worked towards being closer to the God. P2 was baptized twice. He was told that his first baptism was invalid and a second was needed to fully obtain salvation. However, the baptism kept being postponed because he was told he was not being honest. As discussed earlier, the way to salvation was through confessions for P2. Basically, punishment came in the form of verbal abuse, referred to as rebuking. He worried that he either wasn't confessing enough or he was confessing too much. Either way, he was in trouble. Each of the cults that participants belonged to was considered a spiritual group. Leaders preached the idea of God or a godlike state that could only be reached through following leaders and their dogmas. 4 of the 6 men held some religious spiritual identity before entering their respective cults. Analysis showed that the 4 men who held some spiritual beliefs before entering reclaimed their spiritual freedom by evolving their beliefs. 1 man became a strict atheist, showing a complete dissolution of any remaining ties to previous cultic beliefs and religious identity from before he entered the group. P6 held firm to some of his beliefs, but expanded his awareness of the universe. He believes that, quote, "we're really not alone in the cosmos," unquote, while P1 still practices meditation. While in his cult, P2 was encouraged to believe in the Bible as the literal word of God. Once he left, his beliefs changed. He didn't believe that the Bible was the literal word of God, and he believed that salvation could be earned by anyone. So when he left the cult, it was as if he realized he didn't need to be punished or abused to receive that salvation. The after effects of coercive control are as important as the abuses suffered within coercively controlling cultic environments. Once out of the respective cults, each participant processed their experiences differently. However, all the men came out of their experiences with psychological damage. We talked about P2 suffering from chronic paranoia and receives disability because of his punishing confession sessions and constantly having to go back and forth to make sure he was going to obtain salvation. Therapy for participants came in many forms. 2 men used creative outlets by writing memoirs to process their experiences. P3 entered traditional therapy for trust and religious issues. P5 tried group therapy, and P4 felt that therapy was of no help. P5 noted that it is very hard to find therapists knowledgeable in the field of cults. This is one reason why this research is so important. The more research that is done on the victimization of men in coercively controlling environments, the more that research will inform therapeutic practices. Findings also showed that some participants found positive takeaways from their abusive environments. P6 learned unconditional love and selfless service. I want to end on here. He stated, quote, "One of the upshots of being sexually abused by a man is that when you come out on the other side of it and get a little bit of healing from it, It made me feel more gentle with other men. I'm glad I have that. The price of it sucked, but I'm glad I have that. By finding the good in the experience of abuse, P1 was able to begin healing. He found compassion for other men in similar situations. The study utilized participants' reports of what happened to them to suggest that male victimization through coercive control, including sexual abuse, may be prevalent in coercively controlling cultic environments. The UK Serious Crime Act of 2015 includes relevant behavior of a perpetrator of coercive control, including isolation, deprivation of basic needs, physical intimidation, and sexual assault. All of these can be seen in cultic environments. However, the act identifies intimate or family relationship and not cultic environments. So if the act is updated to include cultic environments, it could help men heal more as they are more identified, and they would be more likely to come forward. The focus of this research relied largely on the narratives of the participants. Further research should include a larger and more diverse population of participants. There is limited resources and services available to men and a multitude of reasons that prevent men from reporting their abuse. Research into the reporting of male victimization of coercive control would provide further insight as to how to help men who have been abused, either in intimate partner relationships or coercively controlling cultic environments, and could encourage other men to come forward for help and support. I think I can see that. How many minutes? One. Okay. I'm going to stop here, but I would like to tell you all that there's more information. My dissertation is fairly long, and if you would like further information or read more about it, please feel free to email me. I would be glad to send you that document so you can look further.